Today's story is about Solomon, the man whose brilliance shaped a kingdom and whose hands built the legendary Temple of Jerusalem. A ruler unlike any other, his reign echoed with triumph and splendor. But with power came temptation, and the wisest of men would soon find himself tested. In this episode, we dive into how a king of such unmatched wisdom could stray from his path, and what timeless lessons his journey still offers us today. Before we go any further, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of these powerful biblical stories. Solomon's story began beneath the weight of a divine promise. He was the son of David, the greatest king Israel had ever known, and Bathsheba, a woman whose life was marked by sorrow and resilience. From the beginning, there was something different about this child. He wasn't the eldest nor the firstborn among David's sons, but he was the chosen one. There was an air of destiny around him, like a silent wind carrying whispers of greatness. Everyone sensed that his future would not be ordinary. When David grew old and weary, his heart shaped by countless battles and his gaze fixed on the horizon of death, he offered Solomon words that carried the burden of royalty. "Follow God's ways, my son," he told him. "Only then will your throne stand strong." Just imagine the weight Solomon felt in that moment. How do you fill the shoes of a giant? How do you lead a nation overflowing with dreams and expectations right after your father's passing? It was then that Solomon faced his first true challenge. Israel was surrounded by enemies, some within, others lurking beyond its borders, waiting for the slightest misstep. What path should he take? Who could he trust? The pressure mounted. Doubts swirled in his mind like a storm. But then, one night, something extraordinary happened. In a dream, God himself appeared to Solomon and made him a breathtaking offer. "Ask for whatever you want, and I will give it to you." Now stop for a moment. Picture that. What would you ask for if the creator of the universe offered you anything? Solomon could have asked for anything. He could have wished for endless riches, vast empires, or even eternal life. But instead, with a heart full of humility and a mind already beginning to shine with brilliance, he made a request that shocked even the heavens. "Lord," he said, "give me wisdom. Grant me understanding, so I may judge your people with justice." Solomon understood what many leaders never do, that ruling a nation is not about power or pride, it's about responsibility. Israel wasn't just any kingdom. It was God's chosen people, rich in history, bound by sacred laws and ancient traditions. How could a young and inexperienced ruler guide such a people? How could he know right from wrong when lives were at stake? He didn't ask for treasure. He didn't ask for fame. He asked for discernment, so his choices would be wise, his actions just. And when God heard that selfless request, he smiled with favor. Not only would Solomon receive the wisdom he sought, but God also promised him wealth, honor, and a reign like no other. When the young king awoke, it was no ordinary morning. That divine dream had changed him forever. Now he carried a new weight, not just the crown of Israel but the mantle of divine wisdom. And it wouldn't take long before that wisdom would face its first great test. Just 2 days later, Solomon sat on his throne when two women approached him. Their faces were worn by exhaustion and grief, and in their arms, one baby, one living child, and one impossible dilemma. Both claimed to be the child's mother. Both told different stories. One said the dead child belonged to the other. The other said the same. There was no evidence, no witnesses, only pain and accusations. The royal court fell silent. How do you uncover truth when both voices plead with equal desperation? All eyes were on the young king. This moment, this impossible situation, would show the nation whether he was truly fit to wear the crown of David. Then, with a steady gaze and unwavering voice, Solomon spoke, "Bring me a sword." The court gasped. Heads turned. Whispers echoed through the grand hall. Confused murmurs rippled through the hall. A sword? What could the king possibly have in mind? But the guards didn't question him. At his command, they moved swiftly, bringing a gleaming blade before the throne. Then came Solomon's shocking decree. "Cut the child in half," he said. "Give each woman one half." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Eyes widened. What kind of judgment was this? Suddenly the air shifted. One of the women cried out in anguish, her voice breaking with desperation. "No, please don't harm the child. Let her have him, just let him live." But the other woman remained cold, indifferent. "Go ahead," she said. "If I can't have him, neither will she." In that moment, the truth stood clear as day. Solomon, with the wisdom granted by God himself, had pierced through the lies. He knew that only a true mother would rather lose her child than see him harmed. Justice was served not by sword, but by insight. And from that day forward, the people of Israel saw Solomon not merely as a king, but as a leader unlike any they had known. A man whose decisions carried the weight of divine wisdom. But this was only the beginning. After the case of the two mothers, Solomon's fame exploded across the land and beyond its borders. People spoke not only of his fairness but of a presence upon him. Something sacred, something chosen. And soon he would begin his greatest work. The Temple of Jerusalem. This would not be just another building, it would be the sacred heart of the nation. A place where heaven touched earth. Where worship would rise like incense, and the presence of God would dwell among his people. Solomon had known since childhood that this mission was his destiny. David, his father, had dreamed of building it. But God had chosen David for war, and Solomon for peace. The dream would live on, but it would be Solomon who gave it shape. So the young king began. Massive stones were quarried and chiseled with precision. Rare cedar wood traveled across oceans and deserts from Lebanon. Skilled craftsmen from every corner of Israel gathered with one purpose, to build a house for God. And Solomon? He oversaw every piece of the puzzle. Every beam, every brick, every ornament. As if God's own hand were guiding his every move. For 7 long years the work continued. Until at last, the temple stood. Majestic, radiant, holy. The construction was nothing short of awe-inspiring. Anyone who gazed upon the golden walls and towering columns felt a shiver ripple down their spine, as if the very finger of God had etched his presence into every stone. The Temple of Jerusalem had become more than just a building, it was the beating spiritual heart of Israel. A sanctuary where men and women came searching for peace, for forgiveness, for connection with the divine. And with its completion came a new era. Prosperity flowed like a river through the kingdom. Solomon, now reigning at the peak of his glory, watched as his people thrived like never before. The streets of Jerusalem buzzed with life. Caravans from distant lands crossed Israel's borders, their camels laden with gold, silver, sparkling jewels, and exotic spices. Israel had become more than just a spiritual center, it was the jewel of the ancient world. With divine wisdom guiding him, Solomon ruled with unmatched intelligence. He forged alliances with powerful kingdoms. He built grand palaces that stood like monuments to his reign. He strengthened the walls of the cities in the hearts of his people. And his name, it echoed far and wide. Tales of his wisdom and unimaginable wealth crossed scorching deserts and vast oceans. Every day, it seemed, more treasures arrived at Solomon's feet. But with every jewel and coin, an unseen danger crept closer. As the gold poured in, so too did temptation. The hearts of the people, and Solomon's own heart, began to drift. Slowly, quietly, there was a silent warning in the air. Gold, as radiant as it is, can blind. And with each passing day, the excess of wealth began to obscure what truly mattered. Like a shattered mirror reflecting splinters of glory, the riches distorted the truth behind the image. Deep within Solomon, something was shifting. His hunger for more gold, more power, more magnificence, burned like a fire that refused to die. And then, one morning, a grand procession entered the kingdom of Israel. All eyes turned east. From the horizon came the Queen of Sheba, her royal caravan glittering under the sun. Merchants and musicians marched beside her. Servants followed with gifts piled high, treasures from a foreign land, all heading toward Solomon's palace. Solomon's fame had stretched far, beyond mountains, across burning deserts, and over vast seas, until it reached the ears of a distant monarch, the Queen of Sheba. Ruler of a wealthy and thriving kingdom, she was no ordinary sovereign. The Queen of Sheba was a woman of profound intellect and iron will, renowned for her insight, discernment, and power. But she wasn't satisfied with rumors or stories whispered through trade routes. She needed to see it for herself. And so, she set out, on a journey across unforgiving landscapes, to witness the legendary wisdom of Solomon with her own eyes. When she arrived in Jerusalem, she was greeted with great honor. Trumpets sounded. The streets shimmered with excitement. Solomon welcomed her into his marble palace, draped in gold and glory. But the queen had not come simply to admire riches or offer lavish gifts. She had come to challenge him. In those grand halls, where golden tapestries whispered in the breeze and the scent of incense lingered in the air, the queen posed questions, deep, difficult, philosophical. Questions about the mysteries of life, the heart of mankind, and the secrets of the universe. And Solomon answered. With serenity, with insight, with a wisdom that didn't seem human. With each response, her awe grew. Not just for the answers themselves, but for the spirit behind the man, something vast, something sacred. Yet even as admiration blossomed in the queen's heart, a quiet question loomed in the shadows. With all this grandeur, with these powerful alliances, and now even this foreign queen enchanted by his presence, could Solomon remain faithful? Could he still walk in humility before the God of Israel? Her visit only magnified his renown. Across kingdoms and empires, Solomon's name now echoed not just as the wisest, but among the most powerful rulers of his time. And with great fame came greater entanglements. Solomon began weaving a vast diplomatic web, forming bonds with foreign kingdoms by marrying their princesses. Each union sealed a treaty. Each bride came with promises of peace and friendship. The kingdom flourished. Its borders stood secure. Its future looked invincible. But beneath the surface, something subtle had begun to shift. But what began as strategic alliances, connections that seemed to offer nothing but prosperity and security, soon began to plant seeds of discord, seeds Solomon perhaps hadn't noticed at first. The women he married came from distant lands, bringing not only gifts of gold and spices, but also the weight of their cultures, their customs, and their gods. At first, these influences were subtle. Altars to foreign gods appeared quietly, almost unnoticed, like small structures nestled in corners. But over time their presence grew. And with it, so did the quiet erosion of the faith that had once been the pillar of Israel, the belief in the one God who had delivered his people from Egypt. The purity of devotion began to fade, replaced by a blending of faiths, a dangerous mingling of the divine and the false. Solomon fought it at first. He remembered his duty to the God of his father, David, the God who had chosen Israel, the God who had established his kingdom. But as the years passed, the whispers of temptation grew louder. Living among these princesses and their foreign traditions began to change him, to shape his decisions, to cloud his once unwavering devotion. Each new alliance brought with it a new altar, a new idol, a new practice. Slowly but surely, Solomon, the wise king, the builder of the temple, began to forget his first love, the God who had given him wisdom, wealth, and power. While the kingdom flourished in external glory, internally something was breaking. The peace he had won through his alliances began to sow confusion. The wisdom that had once guided him began to crumble, and the king, surrounded by riches, began to lose his most valuable possession, his true devotion to the Lord. Over time, these small, almost imperceptible shifts began to add up. Solomon, who had once dedicated his life to building the temple, the sacred dwelling place of the one true God, found himself constructing altars to foreign gods, honoring idols in a kingdom that had once known only the worship of Yahweh. Sacrifices were made on the high mountains and incense burned to pagan deities. Once, Solomon's heart had been wholly devoted to the Lord, but now it was divided. He didn't entirely renounce the God of Israel, but his loyalty was no longer undivided. And so, the subtle betrayal began, like a crack in a fragile wall, slowly widening until the entire structure was compromised. Each new altar he allowed was another tear in the fabric of his relationship with God. As expected, the consequences began to unfold. The kingdom that had once flourished in peace and unity now began to feel the strain of this spiritual division. The first signs, which had once been invisible, began to surface. Solomon, surrounded by riches, alliances, and all the power a king could ever desire, began to feel a deep emptiness within him. Something wasn't right. It was then that he turned inward. The great wise king who had once asked God for discernment now found himself asking, "What is the real purpose of all this?" It was in this state of inner turmoil that Solomon began to write the book that would later become known as Ecclesiastes. In its pages, he reflected on the vanity of all things. "Vanity of vanities," he wrote. "Everything is vanity." The wealth and power that once captivated him now seemed like nothing more than a fleeting illusion, like a shadow that disappears with the setting sun. He had possessed everything, lands, treasures, wisdom, but it all felt meaningless. Life in its essence seemed like chasing the wind. You run, you strive, but in the end, what is truly achieved? This phase of Solomon's life was marked by a deep existential crisis. The man who had once had all the answers now found himself overwhelmed by doubt and despair. Solomon found himself surrounded by questions, not just about the glory of his reign, the monumental works he had constructed, or the powerful alliances he had forged, but about the fleeting nature of it all. The vastness of time seemed to swallow everything he had accomplished. What once seemed like an everlasting kingdom now appeared fragile, and the golden memories began to tarnish. The great king who had everything was now questioning the very foundation of his achievements. As Solomon sank deeper into his reflections, the kingdom he had built began to show signs of wear and tear. A slow undercurrent of dissatisfaction began to spread, unseen at first, like a quiet whisper that slowly grows louder. The seeds of rebellion were being planted in the hearts of the people, and the whispers of discontent reached the palace walls. To sustain his luxury and ever-growing ambitions, Solomon had imposed heavy taxes on his people. What once seemed like blessings, his monumental projects and his vast alliances, now became burdens for those who toiled under the weight of endless demands. The murmurs of frustration began to spread through the streets, as men and women who had once sung Solomon's praises now spoke in hushed tones about the injustices they were enduring. The hands that had built the great temple, the towering palaces, and the city's grandest structures were now growing weary, tired of the relentless work that seemed to serve only the king's insatiable desires. The glitter of gold and prosperity didn't reach everyone, and on the edges of the kingdom, the spark of revolt began to kindle among those who felt the weight of oppression. A figure emerged willing to challenge the king, Jeroboam. A young, ambitious man started gaining strength among the people. He saw the toll that Solomon's policies were taking and began to position himself as the voice of the oppressed. Dissatisfaction grew, and Jeroboam was not willing to remain silent while Solomon, in his palace, continued to question the meaning of his life and reign. The turmoil outside the walls grew. The shadow of rebellion became more and more real, and Solomon could hardly foresee what was to come. The glory of Solomon's years began to fade like an old painting losing its vibrance over time. The king who had once been celebrated for his wisdom and great achievements was now viewed with different eyes. The burdens he had placed on the people, and his alliances that introduced foreign gods to Israel, left deep scars on his reign. The weight of these choices affected not only his people but Solomon himself. After 40 long years of reign, the memories of his early days as king, when God had granted him wisdom, seemed as distant as the stars. What was left now was a weary man, surrounded by a divided and increasingly rebellious kingdom. Tensions that once whispered on street corners had turned into loud voices of discontent. Small rebellions began to emerge on the edges of the kingdom, led by those who could no longer bear the burdens imposed upon them. Among these rebels, Jeroboam stood out. Solomon knew the ambitious young man was gaining strength, but perhaps deep down he no longer had the energy or will to face it. His closest advisors saw the cracks in his reign and began to fear for the future. What would become of Israel once the old king was gone? The kingdom, once united and prosperous, was now on the verge of collapse. The weight of age, wrong choices, and accumulated mistakes crushed Solomon as he faced the end of his reign. He knew rebellion was inevitable, and that his legacy might not be what he had once imagined. The man who had been celebrated as the wisest in the world, the builder of the great temple of Jerusalem, now watched as the kingdom he loved so much slowly crumbled. His wisdom, which had once enchanted kings and queens from distant lands, no longer seemed enough to heal the wounds he himself had helped to open in Israel. But even so, his legacy was not erased. Solomon had written proverbs and songs. He left behind words of deep reflection for future generations, many of which still echo to this day. He taught us about the complexity of life, the pursuit of wisdom, and the danger of getting lost along the way. His writings, like the book of Ecclesiastes, brought a powerful message. Life is fleeting like a breeze that comes and goes. And in the end, what really matters is not riches or power, but the state of the heart and the choices we make. The end of Solomon's reign was marked by the imminent division of his kingdom. His alliances and the heavy taxes he imposed on the people had planted the seeds of a tragic separation. After his death, the kingdom of Israel, once united under one king, would split in two. The golden glow of his early years on the throne had turned into a shadow, and the peace he had tried to build was now hanging by a thread. Solomon, the great king, ended his life surrounded by the greatness he had built, but also by the mistakes that silently corroded his journey. The Temple of Jerusalem continued to shine under the Israeli sun, a landmark of his initial devotion to God. However, all around him, the altars erected to foreign gods told another story. A story of distraction, of wrong choices, and of how even the wisest can go astray. When Solomon chose wisdom over riches or power, he began his reign with a pure heart, guided by the will to serve God and his people. But over the years, his vision began to cloud. Riches, alliances, and the desire to please others led him astray. He who initially asked God for wisdom to rule with justice ended up allowing his heart to be divided between the Creator and the pleasures and influences of the world. The kingdom he had worked so hard to strengthen was on the verge of collapse. At the end of his life, Solomon seemed to understand that, despite all his wisdom and achievements, the true value of life was not in the things he built, but in the choices he made. His reflections in Ecclesiastes reflect this truth. All is vanity, fleeting like the wind. What truly remains is faithfulness to God and the integrity of the heart. Solomon's story teaches us that success and wisdom alone do not guarantee a straight path. Even the wisest can be seduced by life's distractions. It is a reminder that regardless of our position or wealth, what really matters are our daily choices and the consistency in keeping our hearts focused on what is eternal. In the end, the deepest spiritual lesson is clear. There is no point in gaining the world if we lose what matters most: our soul and our devotion. If you like the story of King Solomon and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. Of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.